Okay, now Monica, here's how this is going to play out.
Hi, I'm Donna Jordan from Jordan Fabrics. Today we're going to be working on our Sister's Choice table runner. So I've got my blocks all completed. We do have another video that shows how to make the blocks, but right now I've got all 5 blocks done and I'm ready to put the blocks together with the borders that go between them and get the runner finished up. So they're all ironed, they're all nice and flat, and we've got our sashing or borders or end caps, whatever you want to call them. So these will fit right onto the patchwork that we've already got. So we're just going to lay that on there. We're going to match up the corners. We're going to use a 1/4 inch seam, and we're just going to stitch right along the edge. Now I'm going to finger press this with my fingernail so the seam allowances are pointing towards the border there. Now we're going to put this one on, but I don't like to sew it with the patchwork side up. I like to sew it with the patchwork side down because we've got a nice straight border here. And in case your patchwork isn't perfectly straight, it's better to put the border on top. So my seam allowances on the patchwork are all ironed the way I want them to go. So as you go, you can feel if they're still facing the way you want them to go. So after you stitch that seam, if you flipped it over, these should all be facing this way they have already been ironed. You don't want them flipping over because it won't lay as flat. So again, we're going to open this up. We're going to finger press the seam allowances, and they're again going towards that border. All the pre-cut kits that we cut out have all the pieces that are exactly the size you need. So this border will fit right onto this patchwork. So there's no trimming anything else off. Got that one. So again, we'll flip it over, stitch from the border side, match the corners. Now those seam allowances want to go this way because there's extra bulk in all these seam allowances here that make it want to go that way naturally. So I'm just opening it up and then drawing my fingernail down the seam. So you just continue on like this for the whole runner, again flipping it over when you need to so that that border piece is on the top. And it really helps if you've got your patchwork blocks ironed nice and flat. Makes the seams going the way you want them to. And you'll see if you've sewn nice and accurately, see the point there? It's coming right in. That seam is right where the point is there. Same down here, right where the point is, not really cutting off the tip. Now over here, you can see my seam allowance is a little big on that side, so I've cut off the tip just a teeny bit. So if you want, you can go back and take that seam allowance out and straighten it up a little bit. My sewing wasn't perfect right there. So as a result, I've stitched over my point just a little bit. One more block to put on. Finger press. And then we've got what I like to call the end caps. So it's the last border on each end of the runner. Those points came out nice. Now we've got one on the other side, and then we will take it over to the ironing board and give it a nice steam press, because the finger pressing works well, but you really want the runner nice and flat before we put the long side borders on. You want to be careful when you finger press that you don't stretch this a whole lot. Now, our borders here are cut on the lengthwise grain of the fabric, so they tend to not stretch much. But if you're sewing patchwork where you've cut it like a jelly roll on the width of the fabric, this will give quite a bit. So you want to then be careful when you finger press that you haven't stretched it. It's okay if it stretches a little, but you're going to want to steam press that back out so it shrinks a little bit. So we're going to take this over to the ironing board and iron it out. Now I've got a great big ironing board that we made. And this is nice because it's got a nice straight edge along here so that when I iron, I have something to look at. Although the runner is straight, it is possible to curve it as you iron it and make it distort. So we want to have that straight thing, that straight edge, so that we can be parallel to it and make sure we're ironing it nice and flat. So the first thing I'm going to do is just make sure that my finger pressing seams are nice and flat. And I usually do this without steam until I know I've got the runner blocked out and straightened up exact. So now I'm just going to make sure everything looks square, and these look perpendicular to the edge, not leaning over one way or the other. And then I use a little bit of steam because it tends to set it exactly how you want it. So you can see that my patchwork is not perfect. So my block is, it's heading out a little teeny bit there. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. And when we sew the borders on, we'll be able to straighten it out a little bit. I suspect that my seam allowance is probably slightly smaller than 1/4 inch on some of these. That's my tendency. So now we've got it stretched out, we've got it really flat. Now we'll take it over and stitch those last borders on. Don't want to forget my glasses. Now these long borders, they're cut usually a little bit longer than you need. So we're just going to sew it on, and then when we get to the end, we're going to trim off the excess. So again, I like to put this on top of the runner. So you want to make sure you don't stretch your patchwork or stretch your border. You want to just lay this right on top of the runner. Some people pin it. I've just sewn a lot of them, so I've got a good feel for not stretching it. And then those small imperfections when you sewed your patchwork together, like right here, it's not perfectly meeting. You won't see that after we stitch this border on. So this is a section here where my patchwork was just a little bit too big because my seam allowances in here were ever so slightly small. So I'm just evening that out with the border. So I'm just going to sew off the end, and I like to fold this back so the sides are even, and then I'm just going to trim along here. And that way I know it's perpendicular. Now this seam, again, you can finger press this open, and that gives you a chance to check and make sure you've got it nice and straight and you haven't snipped off a lot of your tips with your sewing. Mine are probably going to be snipped off a little bit because my patchwork was a little bit uneven, but they're pretty good. All right, one more border and then the top is done. So we have a lot of customers who really like the pre-cut items for a number of reasons. They don't have to cut them. Also, you know what it's going to look like. So if you buy the kit and it's got that picture on it, you know it's going to look like that. Some people who are new quilters aren't as confident in picking out their colors, and they're not exactly sure what it's going to look like when they're done. This way, you know if it looks like that, that's what it's going to look like. And you know you have enough fabric, and you know the pieces are going to fit. So at Jordan Fabrics, we work really hard to have the pieces very precisely cut. And even our more experienced quilters, some nights just want to sew and not have to think about what size should they be cutting. When the pieces are all cut, you can just pick them up and sew. So you probably can't notice as I'm going, but I am making sure that the seam allowances from here are laying the way they were ironed previously. So again, I'm just trimming off the excess there. Now we'll finger press this open again. So when you finger press, you are pulling it open and then taking the back of your fingernail and running it along that seam. And it holds it in place until you can get to the ironing board. So you want to make sure that it's open. You don't want to finger press it like this. You want to make sure you've got, and I'm exaggerating, but you want to make sure it's all the way open and then finger press it. So I'm kind of pulling it open before I draw my fingernail down there. So now we'll take it to the ironing board and give it one last pressing. So you might want to, at this point, before you iron it, make sure that when you sewed your borders on, that your seam allowances are laying the way they ought to. So here's one that's not. So this one got flipped over as I was sewing the border on. So really what we should do is snip out that stitching and iron it back over. And I think that's the only one. But it will lay flatter if you do that. Just pressing it and pulling it like this will make that lay nice and flat, because I like to have it really, really flat before I quilt it. So this is not a step you want to skimp on. You want to get it really nicely ironed. So I'm kind of stretching it as I go to make sure it's nice and flat. So you want to make it nice and smooth, not stretched, so you can check your borders and make sure they're all pointing up and not leaning a little bit. There, all done. So now we're ready to quilt it. So there's lots of methods for quilting. On a smaller item like this, you can do it envelope style, where you sandwich your top and back on top of the batting, stitch around with an opening and flip. But this is a longer runner, and I think I'm going to put it on the quilting machine. So I'm going to sandwich it the traditional way. So I've got my back and batting already laid out here. So I'm not going to sandwich it on the quilting machine. I'm going to sandwich it on the table here. So I've got the back right side down. So the table runner kits do come with the backing, which is nice. So I've got a piece of Hobbs 80-20 batting on top of there. 80% cotton, 20% polyester. And now I'm just going to put the back, the top centered on the back there. And I've got about a ½ inch of back showing all the way around, which is enough for me to get it on the quilting machine if I'm careful. But you can also do this just on your regular sewing machine. So you can stitch in the ditch. A lot of times we'll go around here and then around here and around here. And you can get fancy and go around all the points. I'm probably going to put it onto the long arm, which we've got computerized, and put a nice strawberry or floral pattern on here. So that's really all there is to it. I'm going to pin around the edge, I'm going to stitch around the edge, and then I will pin it onto the long arm, and away it'll go. Now if you like the video, give it the thumbs up, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching.